Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another Safeopedia webinar. My name is Samantha, and here at Safeopedia, it is our mission to support you, our EHS professionals, with safety information, free education, and tools to help you get done on the job place. I'm very excited to welcome back Radians. They are here today, brought us by 80 Safety Network. They are a preferred manufacturer member, and today they're going to walk us through protecting the eyes from chemical splash and spray on the job. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenters. We have Cindy Bouillon-Loire and Michael Myrick. Today, you are going to hear from a former OSHA trainer and safety director on how you can properly identify and protect workers from common chemical hazards on the job. They're going to walk you through everything, so if you have any questions for them, make sure you reach out. I'm very excited to have you all sit back and relax and enjoy this Radiance presentation. With that, Cindy and Michael, let's jump into it.
Great. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to help educate you on the importance of safety eyewear in chemical environments. Michael, can you talk a little bit about how we're going to approach this topic today?
So our goal today is to equip you with just some tools, some ideas to better select the proper protections needed in a chemical environment. Our goal is to arm you with solutions. When you get through with this, hopefully you're able to recognize those hazards and be able to do something about those hazards as you go through your workday. Now, our agenda is going to be pretty simple. We're going to go through some industry information. We're going to go through some information on common citations. Where does OSHA come into the mix? Hazard analysis, what that looks like. Then we're going to dig into what safety glasses are, what goggles are, what does that really mean, and where are some scenarios where those are needed. And then we're going to touch at the very end of the what if. Because with this presentation, you think with chemicals, protecting the eyes, goggles, face shields, things like that. But then what if an accident occurs? We're going to talk about emergency eye wash and how that comes into play.
So let's kick this off by talking about OSHA violations. So every year OSHA puts out this report, highlighting what their top citations were for that enforcement year. So in 2024, PPE eye and face protection actually was the number 9 top cited non-compliance issue with 2007 violations. Typically, you're going to find this type of citation kind of bounces around within the bottom half of the top 10 every year. So consistently issues in the workplace with people being underprotected or not protected at all.
And that's the eye and face protection part of it, the PPE part of it. We're also going to kind of hit on the number 2 most common, and that's hazard communication. So when we talk about things like SDS, and we'll walk through what we're talking about with that as we go through, those kind of play together. So number 2 and number 9.
That's right.
So most of you probably know some of these stats, okay? So as a safety professional, you've seen things, you've heard things, you've read things for years. 2,000 work-related eye injuries require medical attention every day. Now, 16,000 work-related injuries result in missed days work per year. Okay, so that means they came to work with the expectation of being able to do their job, do it safely, go home at the end of the day with everything, but now they've had to miss days of work because of their eye injuries. And according to Prevent Blindness America, 90% of these injuries could have been prevented just by using the proper protection. So it's pretty simple. You have the injuries, but you could have prevented them, 90% of them, just by using the proper protection.
And that's part of what our conversation will be about today is what is the proper protection for the environment or the chemical you're involved? How do you determine that? What's the best solution? That's a big focus today.
Absolutely. When we talk about things like what do the professionals say? Okay, so I was doing some research in this, and Harvard Medical School did a study of chemical injuries to the eye. And so they looked at the different components of what chemicals could affect: solid chemicals, liquid chemicals, powder, and also aerosol. So that's 4 different types of hazards that can be present in the environment. Now, they also say that these injuries, damage could occur between 1 and 5 minutes. So very quick. Now, we'll talk about, especially with the emergency eye wash, how sometimes that can be done quicker. They can actually have that injury happen even quicker. Now, their answer to it, now this is Harvard Medical School. This isn't Cindy and Michael saying this, okay? We want to make sure that you understand as a safety professional that there are a lot of tools out there that help you do this research and understand better what's going on. And Harvard Medical School says very simply, these could have been prevented with the use of safety glasses and or face shields. That's really a simple situation. If it's a chemical environment, you're going to have either goggles or face shields in that.
Sometimes both.
Now that is Harvard Medical School. So what does OSHA say? What is the rule? What is the law in this? Because groups like ANSI, ISEA, they work together to write the standards. Okay. OSHA's the guys out there that come on site that enforce the standards. Now I know, as a safety professional, as a former safety director, those 4 letters are ugly words to you. Okay. I realize that. But OSHA lays out some standards that really help. And in 1910, which is the general industry standard, it simply says that the employer should make sure that that employee is equipped with the proper eye protection or face protection when exposed to a hazard. Okay. Now that's the key there. That's a hazard. Now that's a specific hazard. Okay. Flying particles, molten metal, liquid chemicals, acids, the list goes on there. But what if it's not specifically put in there? Like what does OSHA say with that? Well, there's what's called a general duty clause. And by the way, you didn't sign up for an OSHA training today. But again, you know, I look at my history as being in this industry for a few years and seeing things that I've seen, and then also being on the safety director side of it. There's what's called a general duty clause, which pretty much covers everything else. And it says that that employer must provide that employee a place of employment that are free of recognized hazards. Again, recognized hazards. How do you figure out the recognized hazards? Well, in 1910-132, and again, I know I'm geeking out here. My wife tells me my nerd is showing. All right, so 1910-132 basically says you got to do a hazard assessment. Okay, figure out what the hazard is, and this really applies to a lot of things other than just eye. You know, whether it's hand protection, fall protection, whatever the situation. And if you're in a situation where you're dealing with construction, also know that 1926 refers back to the 1910 standard. So basically it says the same things. You're going to have to find the hazard, figure out what the hazard is, recognize that hazard, and then find a solution to that hazard. So how do we know the hazard? How do we figure it out? All right. Again, SDS sheets. That's if you've been around for a long time, they were MSDS sheets, and then they changed it to SDS, and some of us old timers are still have a hard time saying just SDS. Okay, it's a safety data sheet. You know what it is. You're as a safety director, as a safety professional, you know what an SDS sheet is. They're becoming more and more popular, especially with some of the environmental controls that are in place now. So you're referring to these for a lot of things, but let's just talk about hazard. Okay, what is the thing? Well, in the section 8 of an SDS, you will find where it specifically points out what the safety equipment or the PPE is needed. In this situation, it says safety glasses or goggles and face shield as appropriate for exposure. Okay, now in this situation, I want you to really pay attention to the wording. It says safety glasses or goggles. It's giving you a choice there. When it says and, that means those two go together. Okay, that doesn't say safety glasses or goggles or face shield. It means that one of the first two you select and face shields. Yeah. Okay, so the SDS is going to give you some general guidance. If you've been working in this industry very long, you know that those SDS sheets sometimes are very vague. We're going to talk about a scenario in a little bit that it's very vague. So if you go to it and you have questions, you're like, what is the problem? Then start looking for the other hazards. As we talk through what those other hazards are throughout this, you'll understand. You'll look at impact. You'll look at heat, whether or not it's exposure time, comfort needs, anti-fog, things like that. And then you're responsible as the safety professional to make sure that now there's the proper PPE or some other things we're about to talk about that are in place. So when we talk about knowing the hazards, there is a hierarchy of controls for those hazards. Cindy, tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so when you've identified a hazard, there's a couple of things you can do to approach that hazard, maybe try to minimize the hazard. You're going to start with elimination. So does the hazard even need to exist in the first place? Is it important? If it's not, let's just get rid of it. And if you do have to keep the hazard, can we minimize it by substituting it for something that's less volatile? So if you're using one kind of cleanser or cleaning chemical that is requiring a goggle and a face shield, for example, is there something maybe less severe that just requires a goggle and not a face shield? Can we substitute whatever we're using to minimize the requirement for PPE or for harm, right? Engineering controls. This is just things that you will do to isolate someone from the hazard. I mean, a face shield, if it wasn't PPE, would be an engineering control, right? Because you're creating this division between the hazard and the person. Administrative controls are what you put in place when you know there's a hazard and you need to communicate to people entering the hazardous area that there's a hazard there. In other words, PPE must be worn, make sure goggles are in place, put on gloves if gloves are required. Those are your administrative controls. It's calling out to the end user, to the worker, that they need to protect themselves and gear up before they enter that environment. And obviously PPE, it's last line of defense. You can do everything else here. And if that fails, that PPE that you've given that worker then does provide them protection if they are in an exposure situation.
Typically, you'll see this in your training manuals identified as an upside down triangle. And that little piece at the very bottom, that's PPE.
Yep.
Everything else has to be check marked. How do we do? How do we eliminate? How do we take care of this? And then we need PPE, then we need PPE. So one scenario, we kind of want to just talk about, what does this look like? This is a situation where a guy's turning a valve. There's some type of chemical. We don't have it identified. Like it's looks like could be just water, could be gray water that has a lot of other things in it. Could be whatever. Just name that tune, and it may be there. Now, when I look at this as a safety professional, the first thing I see is, hey, look, we got railing in place. We can't read it from this angle, but it looks like there's some signage in place. So this looks like they're taking care of this, the worker. They're taking care of the situation. But then you look at it and there's a liquid coming out that's just spraying out. And this guy's standing there with gloves that are porous. We won't even talk about gloves today, but gloves that are porous. And then also just safety glasses, no safety goggles, nothing like that. So how would we look at this situation? We look at it and we say, okay, can we eliminate the hazard? No. Can we substitute? Well, there's really no substitution here. You're relieving a valve from something, okay? So can you engineer control? Absolutely, you can engineer it. So you could take a plexiglass shield, you could place it around that pipe to where the worker could stand behind that plexiglass, and now you've engineered controls so that that worker is now safe. So a pretty impressive way of doing that. OSHA is going to come on site. They're going to look at that and go, hey, you did right. And again, as a former safety director, anytime OSHA was happy, you were happy. All right. You weren't getting a fine. But they would look at that and say that is an engineer control. You want to make sure. Now, your signage there would say, stand behind plexiglass shield before turning on the valve. You know, you'd give instructions there. But that's where they would be protected. Now, as an individual, as one that when I think about safety, I think about all of the aspects of it, from hand to body to eyes to feet, everything. Would I also probably wear a pair of goggles behind that? Yeah, I would, just for the just in case. Say it's windy and there's spray that's coming around, potentially, but you wouldn't necessarily have to. Okay, again, PPE being the last line of defense, you could use them, but you don't necessarily have to. So the question comes up, we talk about safety glasses, we talk about goggles. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, and what's the difference? Safety glasses versus goggles, what are they? What makes them special, right? So anytime you're in a work environment where you're needing eye protection, whether it's safety glasses or goggles, you always want to look for a PPE device that is marked with the ANSI ISE Z87.1 mark. That's the standard that sets out the testing parameters and requirements for safety eyewear. Now, the 2020, the standard was updated in 2020, hence the notation there. What that standard sets out is the requirements for coverage. This is a big one. So, you know, the primary protection is related to covering the eye, right? That is the primary thing we're wanting to do is protect the eye. So it defines what that coverage area is, and it's going to be different for a safety glass than it is for a safety goggle. Okay. The standard also has requirements for optics. So the clarity of the lens, it can't have air bubbles or waviness or anything in it that's going to cause eye fatigue, cause distortion of vision, because that's creating a different kind of hazard. If you can't see what you're doing, you can trip down a flight of stairs. Like, that's pretty basic, right? So there's optics requirements. The standard also sets out flame resistance requirements. And then it specifies markings that should be put on any safety eyewear device based on how it was testing. And those markings can be one of 5. Actually 4. There's 4.
There's 4.
C87.1, but then they're followed by one of these 4.
Yeah.
Right, Michael?
Yes, there's absolutely. So when you look at it, okay, if I'm dealing with an impact situation, I've got parts flying, things like that. I want to look for that Z87 plus. So I want to make sure that on that lens, on that, excuse me, the body of that product, to have that Z87 plus. That's going to let me know that's got high impact. Okay. As we talked about in the Harvard study, the hazard could come in a solid particles, projectiles could come in a dust or a powder, so dust and fine particles. You're going to see that D4 marking, and then liquid splash or droplets, which is going to be D3. Now, one of the things that's real important as a safety professional, you think, well, I need safety goggles that are specifically tested for whatever type of chemical. Just keep in mind the test is done on a water system. Okay, so it's not done on specific chemicals. It's done on whether or not the water will get in the goggle itself. Okay, we get that question a lot, so just trying to kind of clarify that. You don't test them for specific chemicals. You test them for whether or not it'll hold back those chemicals.
Stop the droplets.
Absolutely. And then there's also fogging, and we'll talk about a little bit more as we go through, but you really want to look for that premium anti-fog, which is going to meet the X, and that's going to be on the lenses. That's going to be on the body of the product. So you want to make sure when you're looking at it, it is in fact a safety goggle or in fact a safety glass. Okay. Are there products out there that are being sold that are not? Yes, absolutely, all day long. And so you need to make sure that you see those things. Now, there are other things that you have to consider.
Yeah, so, once you've determined what your hazard is, you've selected the proper device, whether it be a safety glass or a goggle, and in most chemical environments, it's going to be a goggle and maybe a face shield, but you always want to make sure that you have the proper coverage and the proper fit. And those kind of are related because for a coverage area, if you have someone with a small head and you give them a glass that, is too large for them, that glass is probably giving them a little bit extra coverage, not a bad thing. But if you flip that and you have someone with a large head and you give them a standard size glass, it may not be covering the entire orbital socket and protecting them properly. And if it doesn't fit properly, if it doesn't give you the right coverage, it's probably not fitting properly. Like I said, they go hand in hand. And the last thing you want is a glass that doesn't fit. If it shifts down on someone's face or up on someone's face because of maybe nose bridge structure, or there not being, a rubber nose pad in place in some high humidity environments, then your coverage area has moved. The glass may be the right shape to cover the area, but if it doesn't sit on your face properly and fit properly, then it's not in the spot it's supposed to be to protect you.
Well, and the fact is, we're located in Memphis, Tennessee. In the United States, we're a melting pot. There are all type of ethnicities, different shapes of faces, different shapes of noses. I even look, when we're looking at glasses and goggles, new products, we try them on multiple different people around the office because we've got people around our company here in Memphis that have little small heads. I'm actually looking at one of them right now. And then we look over and there's one of our sales guys out in Texas. He has a rather large melon. So, if we look at both of those applications, we look and see, hey, there's the possibility of making sure that we have the right fit. Because again, poor fit, poor coverage you're going to have more injuries. Okay.
Yep.
Now, when we talk about these different safety glasses and goggles, let's talk about what a goggle is and what it provides. Okay.
Mhm.
So a goggle itself is going to be something that's going to have a lens on it. It's going to have a gasket. Okay. All of us in high school and college, when you went to chem lab, you had the little cheap, inexpensive goggles that probably didn't protect you against anything because they just went with the lowest bid and got them. All right. We're talking about products that are actually going to protect. Now, typically goggles are going to protect against liquids and dust. That's going to be the maximum possible protection there. You're going to want things like indirect venting. That indirect venting means that the vent's going to be on the back side of the lens. And so when that splash comes up, it's going to go behind the goggle and vent off versus coming down into your eyes. And there's a lot of different things you want to look for. We talk about coverage. You want to make sure that that coverage is completely sealed around. Now, these goggles that I have right now are actually made for prescription glasses, okay? So it's going to fit over the prescription glasses, still give that D3, D4 protection with that. It's got the indirect venting. So you want to make sure that you have good coverage, proper fit, and you have complete complete protection there. Now, let's talk through maybe some scenarios. Let's go through one scenario where a goggle is needed, okay? So I did a little Google searching. What are some of the common hazards out there, common things that come up in plants? And a lot of things referred to like maintenance workers, and unfortunately, maintenance workers probably get a bad rap with this. But you can apply this to a lot of different things. But let's just talk one scenario at a time. So say maintenance workers been out there doing some work. They get paint on the warehouse floor. That's got to be cleaned up. Okay. They're going to go out there. They're going to clean it up. Well, a common chemical that they're going to clean that up with is just mineral spirits. Most of us, if you ever done work on refinishing furniture, things like that, you've used mineral spirits. You don't really think of it as that hazardous of a product, but we'll talk about in a minute how it is. So one of the common ones is a clean strip material. So I pulled the SDS for it. And what it calls for is safety glasses, chemical goggles, or face shields. So it really doesn't specify. But it did specify something that was interesting, and we just wanted to point it out for this training. Again, talking about chemical goggles or chemical protection, it says that using clean strip mineral spirits, contact lenses should not be worn. And so I did some digging in that and realized that a lot of these chemicals that give off vapors, those vapors will get trapped behind the contact lenses. So you really need to be cautious in those applications. That's why when I showed that an OTG type goggle that's going to fit over prescription glasses and still give you that protection, then that's kind of where you need to go with that. So let's look at the means. They're going to pour this chemical on the floor, which is going to be splash. All right. So there's your first hazard. All right. Chemical is a hazard in itself, but now you just splashed it everywhere. Then they're going to use a scraper. So they're going to be scraping that. That dried paint that's starting to liquefy a little bit because of the mineral spirits is going to pop and go in different directions. Plus, there may be other things on the floor that are stuck to the floor that you're scraping up as you go. So now you've also entered into an possible impact situation. So you want to look for a goggle that's going to have a high impact rating. Going to have that D3, D4 protection so that you know you have a good seal around that. So what would be our recommendation in a scenario like that? Our recommendation would be using a pair of goggles the whole time. Now, that seems so simple, but when you look at the potential injuries with this, you're talking about again that potential hazard of 1 to 5 minutes later. All of a sudden, now they don't see really well. Okay, so there are also some situations where some additional things are needed, like face shields.
So a face shield scenario, face shields, depending on the type of material that they are made of, may not offer impact protection. Most of the times, if you're using a face shield, you'll see the use of a safety glass or goggle underneath it. And that's the primary reason why, is because you're still needing that impact protection in that environment. So what are those materials? A PETG material is going to be one of your more economical options. Those shields typically ship flat, and they have like a a removable plastic sheet on them that you take off.
So,
that
so you need to
see.
make sure you remove that plastic sheet. I got a call one time, I'll never forget it, when they said, we asked for clear face shields, you sent us blue.
Yeah, it's just a protective.
And it kind of threw me for a second. I was like, what? There's a protective film on there. And so
Yeah.
you peel that off and then it's clear.
So those are not going to meet the impact standard. They're not going to carry that plus rating on them. A polycarbonate face shield, on the other hand, which is what we've got in our illustration here, that would offer you impact protection. And that's because it's made of the same material as the lens on your safety glass or your safety goggle. Those are going to ship in their rigid form. They're not flimsy. Torque them, they're going to break at some point. But so if you do have to have that impact protection coverage across your face, you're going to need a polycarbonate face shield. Acetate is another material out there, and it actually offers the best chemical resistance. Now, Michael mentioned with goggles that just because we're talking about chemical environments and that the goggles are tested to D3 for liquid and splash, but not necessarily a specific chemical resistance, right? Acetate actually does have some chemical resistant properties. Just its nature offers that. So if you do have a need for that, consider an acetate material, but they're not going to offer you impact resistance. The nature of that material just does not hold up to the testing parameters for that. And again, anytime you're using a face shield, you're most likely need to still use a safety glass or goggle because say there's an impact that happens, blow off valve, something like that, that then hits your face shield. It's going to dislodge that. At least you still have your goggles, your glasses in place as an extra layer of protection there.
And at one point in time, the ANSI standard said you could not use face shields as primary protection. That since has changed as long as that primary protection has that Z87 certification. So if you're using a face shield as primary protection, you don't use anything underneath it. It's not necessarily going to get you a fine from OSHA, but your best practice is to make sure that that's, because honestly in face shields, you're typically, somebody's using a face shield, they're working, and then they flip that face shield up. And so many times you get that, you need that additional protection. So let's talk through a scenario that that is specific to face shields. So another little quick Google search. I love my little Google searches. All right. I looked at some of the common things that you see. One is, again, back to maintenance workers. All right. So just a quick scenario. Maintenance worker working on a commercial dishwasher. You think, is that really a real hazardous situation? I didn't think so, be honest with you, until I looked at the report that happened when a worker was working. They had no protection on at all. You got to think about that dishwashing detergent, which is the most common use is an Ecolab material that's a super concentrated. Okay, so you think about, you wash your hands with like Dawn dishwashing liquid or whatever. You don't want it in your eye.
No,
it's going to hurt when it gets in your eye. But now we're talking about super concentrated detergents. So now it's really a big hazard. So when I looked at the SDS for it, I thought, okay, let's go. It says eye protection and or face protection. I mean, really, can you be more vague than that? I used to love it when I'd get these calls and they'd be asking for gloves and for glasses and things like that. And they would just say, well, here's my chemical. And it says I need protective gloves and protective goggles. What does that mean? Okay, sometimes you got to dig a little further. So when you've got that SDS, you're in section 8, flip down to section 11. Section 11 is going to be that
toxicological.
Yeah, what she said. I never can say that word. Information. All right, so it's going to be that tox information. And when I looked at that, it said causes serious eye damage, redness, pain, or corrosion. Again, we're talking about your eye, all right? So you want to get protected. So that's one hazard that's there. One of the other hazards that is kind of a known when you start looking at the work is that hose that's carrying this detergent is also pressurized. So now you've entered in a second hazard. Yeah. What happened in the scenario, and I'm not into showing gross pictures. I used to work with a guy that loved to show those gross pictures in his trainings. I don't like that. It kind of creeps me out, but needless to say, this guy doesn't have the use of his left eye anymore. Okay. So what happened was that pressurized hose broke and that fitting flew at his face, hit his eye. That was one part of the damage, but the other part of the damage was that detergent went directly in his eye. He lost the use of his eye. So in that situation, like, okay, what would you recommend, Michael? What would be the scenario, this scenario? What would you recommend? Well, I think the best recommendation in a situation like that is you use a goggle the entire time.
Yeah.
Okay, because you've got the presence of the chemical that's going to be ever present the entire repair situation. But you've also got some really big impact protection that you're needed because you have a pressurized hose. So I would use a polycarbonate face shield in that scenario until I've eliminated that hazard. Again, going back to the hierarchy of controls, we've depressurized that hose. Now that's no longer a hazard. You can take that face shield off and set it to the side. All right, but you still keep those goggles on because that chemical is going to be ever present in that. So when we're talking through these scenarios, the reason why we want to just talk through them is just understand that there's steps. You need to look, SDS is a great tool, but also look around what's going on. Cindy and I were talking through this the other day, and she said, well, what about maybe the workers that are working around that scenario? Do you also do some type of guarding or move them back? Yeah, you set up a barrier around those situations. Is that extra steps? And as a safety director, do we like extra steps? No, we don't. Okay. But I'll be honest. My first report as a safety director was a fatality report. Okay, you do that, and everything from there becomes more serious, even the little things.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you're looking. And when we look at these scenarios, there's common things that come up all the time, and one of them is that the fact that the goggles or the face shields, things like that, they fog real easy.
That's right. So anytime you're employing a goggle as a PPE device, you're likely in one of these scenarios or in a fog, potentials for anafog here. High humidity climates, rapid temperature changes. So you're going from a cool building to outdoors, or from a regular indoor temperature into a freezer or refrigerator situation. So those temperature swings are going to create fogging opportunities. Food processing facilities and, wash down areas, even for like a chemical parts washing station. High potential for anafog due to the temperature of the water. You've got chemicals in play. Anafog's important to have on any goggle being used in chemical environments.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of seems basic, but you want to see through the glasses. I mean, I wear prescription glasses, and I'll be honest with you, when I walk out of the office every day and I put my sunglasses on that I've had in my office, I love my office in one way, and the fact that it's freezing cold all the time, and I also hate it in that way too. But when I walk outside, I put those glasses on, they fog up, okay? But and you have to stop for a second. You have to make sure that you can see where you're going.
That's a good point, and that's one reason why that X anti-fog properties marking and that we talked about in relation to the Z87.1 standard, that's why that exists. That was added in 2020 when they revised the standard, because they recognize that while fogging isn't a hazard to like a direct hazard like a projectile or chemical is, it's indirect because
still a hazard, yeah.
You can't see what you're doing, and if that fogging doesn't clear quickly, you're going to take off your safety eyewear and then you're vulnerable to whatever the hazard was in the first place. So
Absolutely.
It's important to guard against anti-fog. How do you do that? Look for premium anti-fog coatings. So there are traditional anti-fog coatings that you'll find on economical safety glasses even. And they are effective for short periods and for regular use. But when you're using a goggle, the potential for fogging is enhanced even more because you are trapping your own body heat between that lens and your face. So the temperature that lens is affected, then you add in the extreme environments, and there you go, fogging, right? So a premium anti-fog coating, there's a lot on the market. Our Radiance IQ anti-fog, we're obviously partial to that. And most of the options that you're going to find on the market, they're going to offer some longer lasting benefits. So in the shelf life aspect of that product, as well as longer life when in use. So you're going to get that coating is going to last longer. You're going to be able to use that device for a longer period before that coating is depleted through your normal use and your cleanings, right? The coating is also going to be more durable. In some ways, that can be impacted by the thickness of the coating, but they also typically include some type of hard coat element, which prevents against scratching. And then the effectiveness. So the testing parameters for the Z87.1X designation for anti-fog performance requires that the device being tested remains fog-free for at least 8 seconds. Sounds like that's a short period of time, but if you count out 8 seconds using, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, it's longer than you think.
You can tell we're from the South because that's how we count here.
I'm literally from Mississippi. That's how I count it. So premium anti-fog coating on a goggle is very important. So make sure that you're seeking those out.
So you want to look for things like acuity.
Yeah.
And because acuity would really help you there.
That would help you.
So speaking of acuity, but when you think about, you've identified the hazard, all right, you've offered protection, you've got a good goggle on with acuity coating, you've got a face shield on, you've got all these protection things in place, you've put plexiglass barriers, you've done everything you can, and then there's the potential of something's still happening, okay? A broom falls over, knocks your goggles off, and you go to pick them up and the chemical gets splashed. There's still potential for hazard. So what is the solution then?
Yeah, that's where emergency eye wash comes in. Where safety eyewear is protective on the front end, it's trying to create that barrier from the chemical or the projectile hazard. Eye wash always comes after the fact. So exposure has already occurred. So this is more of instead of protecting your vision from an injury happening, it's minimizing the injury that's already happening, right? So it's saving your vision in the event of an exposure. For any emergency eye wash device, you're going to want to look for a device that is rated to ANSI ISCA Z358.1. That standard, first of all, calls out the performance requirements. It requires that any gravity-fed, self-contained portable unit, all those terms are kind of interchangeable in the industry, in the market, that they have a minimum of 15 minutes of flushing time. So the water that's coming out of those devices are going to continue to flow for at least 15 minutes to properly flush your eye. The flow also must be soft spent. That just means that the pressure of the water isn't too high to create additional discomfort or injury to an already compromised eye. The standard also, very important, calls out location of the eye wash station. This is important because when we go back to that Harvard study where it says injury or damage to the eye can occur within 1 to 5 minutes, that's permanent injury. Having the station located no more than 10 seconds from the hazard or around 55 feet means that person's going to be able to start flushing their eye and begin removing that material from their eye and minimize the damage very quickly. So that distance from the hazard is important, and also to be located in an area where that injured person doesn't have to walk through a door, upstairs, around pallets. So no obstructions to get that unit. They're probably not seeing well with something in their eye anyway. The last thing you want to do is make it hard for them to get to an area where they're going to find relief and start clearing that material from their eye.
Yes.
Visibility, I said they're probably not seeing well, right? That's a no-brainer. Our Radians eye wash tanks are a high-vis green. You see one behind me here. And that is a color that's easy detectable in most environments, even if your vision's impaired. It just helps the injured party identify and locate where they need to be headed for that relief as well. Training. The standard does say that all employees in an area of a hazard must be trained. Not even the person that's in a workstation that's potentially exposed, but in the nearby area. It's important that everybody knows how to use the eye wash station. When someone's injured, they may not freak out and call for help. They may forget where an eye station is, and coworkers nearby need to be able to navigate them to an eye wash station, deploy that manifold, help them use it, and minimize that damage. So the training element is also important. Inspection. So most of your gravity-fed portable eye wash station, self-contained, are going to be using tap water. And evaporation happens. You know, these tanks are sealed up, but you know, they're still open to contamination, evaporation, a lot of things. So weekly, monthly, and every 90 to 120 day inspections are called out in the standard. I mean, simple enough. Weekly, you're checking to make sure there's enough water in those stations so that they're going to flow for the 15 minutes. Monthly, you're deploying the manifold and making sure that there's no obstructions in the hoses that are keeping the water from flowing as it should. And then those 90 to 120 day inspections are more about draining those eye wash stations of the existing water, rinsing them out, adding fresh water with preservatives. Because even with our modern day, filtration systems, water has some bacteria. If you've ever I don't know if if you have children that are in school, they do these science projects where, you do a cup of water, you sit in your windowsill for a week and see what grows in there.
Yeah, it's very interesting, some of the stuff that grows. But when you think about that, I mean, you want them to make sure that they're putting clean water in their eyes. They're not adding to the hazard by introducing something. And I mean, I have seen in plants where in the fixed units where there's literally plants growing in them, and the portable stations, there's 14 layers of dust on top of it, and you look and you know that if you deployed that manifold, there's probably things that you can't pronounce that are going to come out of there. So you want to make sure that that inspection is happening.
Yeah.
And in order, again, it's that just in case something happens.
Yeah. And you have to document those maintenance. OSHA comes in, they're checking, you may have a station in the right place and all of that. But if you're not, doing these inspections at the intervals that are required, you can face some non-compliance and citation trouble there. This little video here just kind of illustrates what the flow from an eye wash station looks like. You can see it soft spent. That manifold was up at a 90-degree before being dropped here in this visual. Part of the requirements for eye wash stations is that the manifold be able to be deployed within 1 minute and with one hand, just again to not create any barriers to that injured party receiving some relief. In the illustration here, you'll see our eye wash station mounted on one of our eye wash stands. Part of the location requirements under the standard is related to the height of installation. You don't want someone who's, of average height have to squat because the station is too low in order to reach the water stream to flush their eyes. And on the flip side of that, you don't want the station mounted so high that someone has to stand on their tippy toes or can't reach the water. It's got to be within a certain range for the average person.
Absolutely. But what if so this is an emergency eye wash station. You see some fixed stations and facilities. But what if, somebody just gets a little bit of dust in their eye, or maybe it's a real big environment where it's a very corrosive material that they're dealing with, and that 55 feet, there may be some damage that occurs. What do you do with those scenarios?
Yeah, so there's something in the standard called a supplemental device, and that in the industry can be referred to as bottled eye wash, personal eye wash stations. So the key thing to note here is that these do not meet the requirements for 15 plus minutes of water flow. So they're not going to give you compliance in those areas where you've determined that the hazard requires an eye wash. And like I said, if you've got a goggle that's required, you most likely are going to need an eye wash. They go hand in hand. So these exist from a supplemental standpoint. Now, one thing that I would say you can look for in section 2 of an SDS, there is an area where if you see the word serious or severe eye irritation, that's a good indication that you're going to need an eye wash station. If you don't see that on an SDS, or an SDS isn't available for a substance, you may still be dealing with a chemical or a substance that doesn't require eye wash, but based on the nature of it and how it's being used, as a safety manager or an end user, that if that gets in your eye, like dirt, for example, a very dusty environment, if that gets in your eye and you don't get it flushed out, you're going to rub your eye. It's going to cause scratching. It's uncomfortable. A personal eye wash station or bottled eye wash may be appropriate in those scenarios. So it's kind of a judgment call, good rule of thumb. But if the SDS is calling for, serious and severe eye irritation or damage, always go for a full eye wash station.
Yeah.
What about a bridge the gap situation? That comes up too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe the SDS has very clearly said we need an eye wash station, but the chemical being used or the substance being used is highly caustic, highly corrosive, and can begin causing damage to permanent damage to the eye, not in that 1 to 5 minute time frame, but like within seconds. And a lot of chemicals do fit this bill, right? If you have a worker who's in their workstation using this chemical that has the potential to be exposed, giving them a personal bottle that's at arm's length. If they are exposed, they can grab that bottle, pop the cap, begin flushing their eyes, and then make their way, 55 feet or 10 seconds away to the full station for the 15 minutes of flushing. In that scenario, you're really offering immediate relief and you're minimizing the damage that could happen to that person's eye.
And so one of the things that I've seen and is you walk into a facility, they've got the bottle there. So there's like the first step, they're good. All right, the first step. But that bottle, the seal has been all messed up. It's dirty. It's been there for 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
Is there anything that a safety director needs to look for to make sure that they're doing what they need to with those bottles? Because you talk about with the eye wash station, the maintenance and the inspection,
Yep.
but what about these bottles?
Yeah, so if you are employing or using these personal stations, inspect those at least on a monthly basis to make sure that all of them are going to be marked with the manufacturer and/or an expiration date. Make sure that they're still okay to be in use based on the date. And then also just make sure that the seal's not broken. If that seal's broken, then there's potential for the fluid inside to not be, essentially like a purified solution. If it's broken, it's been compromised, and you don't want someone using that and introducing whatever bacteria could have creeped into their injured eye. So good question. That just add those to your regular monthly inspections and ensure that they're ready for use if needed. Hopefully not, but if they're needed, you definitely want to make sure that they're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the good thing is we do have things like fast facts. You want to learn a little bit more about eye wash stations, about safety glasses, about eye and face protection. You can scan the QR code. You can go to radiance.com. You can get that information. We want to supply you with as much data as we can to help you. I mean, you're making selections to help people with their safety, to go home at the end of the day completely safe. So we want to make sure that you have those tools available to you.
And of course, if there's questions that those fast facts, don't quite address, we all know there's unique situations that come up that are, kind of in gray areas. You can't interpret a SDS, reach out to one of your distributors for some assistance. Michael and I are always, happy to assist if needed and be a resource for you. So don't hesitate to, ask for help and assistance in determining the proper solutions for your chemical environment. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide this training. We hope it's been helpful. We enjoy doing these. It keeps us sharp. So
it does, yeah. It
beneficial.
Gives us an opportunity to, yes, we showcase our company and our products. But again, because of my background being a safety director and OSHA trainer, I want to make sure that the employee is protected properly. And so we want to be able to help you any way we can. So at this time, we're going to take some questions and hopefully be able to provide you with some answers.
Fantastic. Cindy, Michael, that was a ton of really great information and a ton of really cool information. I've never seen a portable eye wash before. That eases a lot of concerns that I've had on job sites before. Where is it? How can I get to it? Not that I've ever had to use one, but I love that they're available to us. So before we wrap it up today, is there anything you want our audience to take away from today, keep top of mind so that they can be safe, secure, and successful?
I think the key point is I want you to know that you're not in it by yourself. You know, as a safety professional, you have your distributors. Your distributors will reach out to our sales reps. Our sales reps will reach out to us. There is layers of people who will help direct you in the right direction, and you're not in it by yourself. I know from being in that role, and walking through facilities and seeing EH&S directors, safety specialists, whatever term is in that facility. Sit there with so many questions, and they just don't know where to find all the answers. We don't have all of them,
We
but
try.
we will do everything we can, you know, and we'll even admit when we just Googled it, okay? But we'll try to help you as much as possible. And again, there's layers there. Reach out to your distributor. Distributors will reach out to our sales reps. Sales reps reach out to us. We'll make sure that we get you the help that you need.
Yeah, and just to kind of, follow that up, if you're in doubt, always go the safest route. If you're not sure whether you need a safety glass or a safety goggle, there's kind of that gray area and you just can't quite get the answer that you're looking for, whoever you're asking. Going with that safest route in a chemical environment, especially, is the way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you, and hopefully we've been a little bit of help to you. If not, you just spent a lot of time just watching a couple of people talk.
Perfect. Well, Cindy, Michael, again, thank you so much for your knowledge base. We always love having Radiance here, and a thank you to AD Safety Network for allowing you to be here. Because without you guys, we can't stay safe. And I love that what Michael said, we are all in this together. So make sure that you're reaching out. Their emails are on the screen. Take those down if you need to reach out to them. But as they said, there is layer upon layer of how you can get the right information and the correct products for you. And as Cindy said, just make sure to take the safest route if you are in doubt. So thanks again, guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge, and we'll see you on the next one.